all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I am one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or She-Cup.
And we are continuing with our novels, books, comics series. Novels and books are the same thing. I guess actually there technically is a difference between a novel and a book.
Well, like all novels are books, not all books are novels.
Correct. Yes, comics, short stories, and novels. And we're almost done.
We are. We really only have like 2 more episodes after this.
Yes.
I think we have another character deep dive and a patron chat or 2 left in the season. But as far as like actual episodes on the books, etc., yeah, we only have this one and 2 more.
Exactly. And so today we are going over the last book by David Gaider.
Yes, we are. I'm excited to talk about this one.
So we're here to talk about Asunder. So why don't you start getting us in with our info fun facts?
Yeah, so this one and next week's, where we talk about the Masked Empire, are both, very Dragon Age Inquisition focused books. And that's just the nature of them, because this one at least was published in December of 2011. So a couple years before Inquisition even came out. And like we already mentioned, this one was written by David Gaider, and it was published by Tor and Dark Horse. Tor published the original version, and then Dark Horse published the deluxe edition that has the cool covers that came out just a few years ago. So this book, it should be noted, has a ton of references to Dragon Age Origins and a few to Dragon Age 2 as well, including the appearance of 3 characters from Origins and references to Irving, the hero of Ferelden, Anders, Elthina, and Oghren. So there's a lot of fun little cameos and references, but also I really want to start us out before we get into the plot with a little bit of discussion about timing of this novel, because there is a discrepancy of when this novel occurs. So there are multiple references throughout the book to the Kirkwall uprising, Anders, his explosion, everything that happens. And these references indicate that Asunder happens 1 year after Kirkwall. 1 year after Kirkwall would be 938 Dragon. But the novel explicitly states multiple times, as like headings of chapters and stuff, that the events take place in 940 Dragon.
More than any other act, I think the time discrepancy might be due to Dragon Age 2 not being clear. But I think it's possible that Act 3 takes place over more than just like a day, or not a day, or like a year.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's ever been clarified. I know that the World of Thetis Encyclopedia kind of doubles down on the timeline here, which, just basically continues the discrepancy. So I'm not sure we'll ever get an answer, but that is something to remember when you come in here and you're like, oh, you got the date wrong. Don't leave us nasty comments, because it's in the book. It's not on us. We're not getting the date wrong. So just an FYI to everybody out there. Okay, so something I just want to get out of the way first is this is a multi POV novel. We get POVs from Reese, we get POVs from Cole, and then we get a few from Evangeline. And so at the beginning, the first 3 chapters set up their perspectives. So I want to go through all of those, and then we can kind of give any reactions we have to those first few chapters, and then we'll kind of go plot point by plot point. First, we have Cole, and Cole is none other than the companion we get in Inquisition, but in this, he is the ghost of the spire. No one sees him, and if they do, it's just a glimpse. The only exception is Reese, as well as the people that Cole murders. The people that he murders, though, notable, they're all people who want to die. Evangeline, secondly, she is guarding Justinia V at an Orlesian ball. Liliana is there when a young Templar arrives to tell Evangeline that another murder has occurred in the spire, as well as an old friend from Ferelden has arrived and wants to see Liliana. As the ball is ending, a mage named Jeannot has secretly entered the room and tries to assassinate the divine. Evangeline kills him. Reese and Adrian discuss the murders before being called to see the Knight Commander. When they arrive at his office, however, they realize that Knight Commander Aaron is no more. Instead, Lord Seeker Lambert is now in charge of investigating the murders in the White Spire.
So obviously, like, this is the location where we get the most about Shelby's most hated character of all time.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, if you want to know why this man is the bane of my existence, all you have to do is read the book.
Yeah.
It's a pretty quick read. It's not that big, it's not that big of a commitment. But in short, he's an asshole. And the reason why we call him Lord Seeker Asshole is because he is deserving of the title. And on some level, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, on some level, I do understand his motivations, because we learn later in the novel, near the end, that he worked in Tevinter and basically befriended this mage who ended up becoming the Black Divine, and he used blood magic the whole time, and Lambert never knew. And so he's bitter and pissed off at his former friend, and so on some level I get it. But on another level, it's like, why are you taking out your anger at this one man on all mages? You've allowed your anger at your former friend to bleed over into oppression of every single person who ever fits into the same group as your former friend. And that's shitty. So that's one of many reasons why I hate Lambert, but I really don't want to tangent too much on Lambert, because I could go on for days on that. But do you have other thoughts about any of the setup chapters before we move on?
Yeah. And just if you want more, we do cover Lambert in a side character somewhere deep in the recesses, probably maybe in some kind of Templar episode or Seeker episode.
Yeah, we covered him on the side character for our Seekers episode.
Which makes sense.
Would make sense, yeah.
So there's 2 things here, and I knew all of this stuff with Cole, and like this is the one book that I actually read before we decided to do this series. I had read this one before. Cole just makes me sad. His story makes me sad. And what a terrible place. And I know we'll talk about what is Cole, but like, what a terrible place for a spirit of compassion to be than a circle.
Yeah, and I mean, also, I know that in the book, Lambert says the boy Cole never existed, like it wasn't real. But I don't agree with that personally. And the thing for me is, like, I believe Cole was a person at one point in time, and his entire life story, from when he was a child in his parents' home to him dying in the spire to him being possessed by the spirit of compassion, his whole entire life is one of tragedy. He never really knows love. He never really knows. He is compassion. He is being inhabited by a spirit of compassion, but he's never been treated compassionately. And that's heartbreaking.
Right. Which this isn't a Cole episode, just like it's not a Lambert episode. So I don't want to dig too much. And I know in the show notes. We'll talk about Cole once we're done. But and then this last thing with Evangeline, one, I can't remember if it actually is covered in the book or not, but do we ever find out what friend from Ferelden Liliana wants to meet with? Or wants to meet?
It's Wynn.
That's what I thought. I couldn't remember if that was confirmed, but that's the only thing that makes sense because of later in the book.
Yeah.
But right from the start, I think Evangeline is introduced as a character that like we will have compassion for because she is not like a malicious Templar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important of her setup and character. And I appreciated that in her first chapters. And so much, like you said, is referenced to Origins, but so much of this book is referenced in Inquisition.
Yes.
It's probably a super important book that I did read before Inquisition. And
really?
So, yeah, because I remember I read it because in one trailer promotional, there was Patrick Weeks talking about how the veil has been ripped asunder. The veil has been asundered, basically, which means to tear apart. And so I was like, oh, there's this book called Asunder. I bet this is some kind of setup to this book, thinking about how the veil gets broken. Well, it wasn't. The asundering is about the circles. And so, but it was so like, I remember this book hooking me right away because I was like, oh, I'm getting follow-up to what happened in Kirkwall. Like how Kirkwall's going to...
Its implications.
Its implications in the wider world. And I think that's so important here. But just here of like getting this assassination attempt on the Divine, because this singular moment shapes the perspectives of a lot of mages that we encounter in Inquisition. This moment, the Kirkwall incident and the Ravani Circle, I think, are the big driving forces for what happens with the abolishment of the Navarra Records. Navarran Records?
Navarran Accords.
Yes.
I absolutely agree. And that's, I think that's the story of the book. So let's just dive right in. So kind of the first plot point after all of that opening is Rhys pretty much immediately has a suspect for who he thinks is the murderer, and that's Cole. And so he goes looking for him, and Evangeline soon realizes that Rhys is missing. And so she and the first enchanter Edmond, I believe is his name, they go to get Rhys's phylactery so they can find him. And when she finds him, he is supposedly alone and like basically on the brink of battle. And so she like takes him, imprisons him, and eventually after 4 days, Rhys is released because the mages have all gathered in the Great Hall. And that's when Wynn appears, and she cautions patience. She cautions them to not do anything rash. Mages are pissed off about that, and they all begin to argue. And so that's when the Templars end the gathering. And there is another meeting, actually, with Lambert, this time with Rhys, Evangeline, Wynn, and Adrian, who is another mage who is very aggressive, very antagonistic, wants the circles to break away, like, and has for many years. She's kind of the face of the libertarians in this circle. And remember, I should give just a little reminder. The libertarian fraternity is the fraternity that wants mage freedom the most, wants them to be completely independent. The Aquitarians are kind of this middle ground, like, hey, the circles need reform. We need more freedoms, but like mages still need to be kind of restricted. And there are a few others, loyalists, who are super, super loyal to the Chantry, as the name kind of implies, and a few others. But anyway. So in the meeting with Lambert, they learn that Wynn has been sent on a mission from the Divine to find her friend Pharamond, who has been researching demons and the Rite of Tranquility. Wynn wants to take Rhys with her because he is her son. Shocker, spoiler alert, basically the only person in the room who even knew that was Rhys, and he's the one that spills the beans because he walks in and is like, hey mom, and everybody's like, lick ass, Pokemon meme. But anyway, Adrian wants to go with them, and Lambert ends up sending Evangeline too as a Templar presence. And then before they leave, Lambert orders Evangeline to kill the mages if the results of the research involve the rite being reversed.
It's so interesting because I can't decide if it's better to like play Inquisition and then read this book, or read this book and then play Inquisition, because there's so much that's like the way the game is presented when they reveal about the Rite of Tranquility being reversible. It's like this big shocking moment. It's this big development for Cassandra and everything. So if you read this book, that takes that away, but then you understand like this book so much lays the groundwork for everything that's going on up into the Conclave, and really the opening of Inquisition. So I can't decide, but I think a couple things here. It's so interesting to me the way the White Spire is kind of being conducted, because this is our first and only introduction into the White Spire. And it's like the circle of circles. Like this is where everything is, and it is so locked down. Like the Templars are so afraid of anything about Kirkwall, about the Rite of Tranquility, about anything getting into these mages. They are so afraid. It is just a breeding ground of fear and paranoia. And I'm honestly surprised that Cole is the only spirit that exists in that tower.
I think that's fair, especially since basically the bottom levels are like just like this pit. That's what they call it. They call it the pit, and it's basically like corroded away, like what used to be part of the tower that's like been so old and disused that the sewers have crept in. And so it's like this very easily could be a really bad situation, and it's surprising that it's taken so long to get there. But also I do think that, you know, one of the reasons why the White Spire is so locked down right now in this novel is because of the assassination on the Divine Number One, because of Kirkwall, and because there's been uprisings. And so I think normally it would probably be a little bit more lenient, but that's an assumption on my part. But I do enjoy seeing the White Spire, and there are a few glimpses of more of Orlais and more of Val Royeaux that we really do get to see that we don't get in the game. So I did also appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's noted to say we didn't talk about this, but Janot was, that's how I said his, Janot.
It's definitely Janot.
Janot, it's French. Yeah, Janot. He is a member of the Libertarian fraternity. And so Lambert, right from the get-go, is blaming the Libertarians for, or at least implying that he believes the Libertarians are behind the assassination attempt on the Divine.
Yeah.
And so that's also a reason for why there's so much like shut down and disrupting of gatherings. I'm reminded of that scene of from Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix, where Umbridge is like, gatherings of 3 or more students are now strictly forbidden.
Okay, so kind of the next plot point is they go on this mission, right? And so they leave Val Royeaux and travel towards the western approach. Their destination is none other than Adamant Fortress. They do get attacked by mage haters in a tavern. Reese realizes that Cole is following them, and they hear that war is brewing in the Dales. And then eventually, when they do reach the western approach, they get attacked by Darkspawn. And so it's just very much a perilous journey, but they do eventually arrive at Adamant. And when they get there, they find that A, it's a graveyard of bodies, B, there's another hostile group of Templars waiting for them, and C, Shale, the golem from Origins, is also inside and has been waiting for them this whole time.
Couple things. One, I love that Shale and Wynn have just been buddying these past 10 years. I think that is so funny. I like to imagine that when Shale just makes sassy remarks and Wynn just nods along and then makes sure the birds don't land on Shale.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that that's something you have to imagine. I feel like that is directly in the novel.
Yeah, that's probably true. Again, great appearance from Shale and all of that. Reese and Cole, we didn't mention this, at least in the thing, but Reese has a particular gift as a mage. He's a medium, which means what you think it would in our thing. He has a particular gift for communing with spirits and figuring out spirits and all of that stuff, which is one of the reasons that like Lambert immediately distrusts Reese from the get-go, because he's like, anyone who wants to, talk to spirits
is suspicious.
And so like his relationship with Cole from the get-go is like, he knows that Cole is different than the other spirits that he's seen, and he's like, why can't I sense him like I can sense other spirits and other things like that? So I think that's interesting, and like Cole following them, and like it's interesting to me Cole's behavior in this book, because I feel like he's kind of like this, for lack of a better word, puppy that's just following anyone who has given him any kind of attention. And so he's following Reese because Reese can see him and he can talk, and like he's longing for connection. It just, again, sad Cole thoughts.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think he is that 100%. He is so lonely, and that just describes him to a T. So when they get inside of Adamant, they do find Pharamond and his laboratory. First, they have to fight off a horde of demon-possessed corpses, though. Pharamond himself is also possessed by a demon, which should be impossible since he is tranquil. But Pharamond has indeed found a way to reverse the rite. The demon plays on the group's secrets, revealing Lambert's mission to Evangeline, and Adrian is furious. They want to attack each other. It's just kind of a bad situation, but Wynn takes them into the Fade to confront the demon first. And Cole at this time is also in Adamant, but he doesn't want to go down to the library. And so instead he finds a girl who has been hiding and helps her. But when they go into the Fade, Cole is kind of sucked in too, because he's in the building.
One, what is David Gaider's obsession with people getting sucked into the Fade?
I mean, I don't know if it's David Gaider's obsession as much as it is just kind of a very classic Dragon Age plot device at this point. We wouldn't have a piece of Dragon Age literature if you didn't go into the Fade, in my opinion.
Right. I like how, and I know that like a lot of times Inquisition is technically like the first time we physically go into the Fade. But like they're saying, that's like, oh my God, we're in the Fade. How are we going to do this? And all the players are just like, we've been here before.
Yeah, like this is old hat to us, but okay, I guess. Yeah.
But again, another Inquisition reference. Here we have Adamant that is abandoned, and it kind of makes sense to me why, after the events of Adamant here, it makes sense to me why the Grey Wardens would hunker down here to summon a demon army.
Right, and it also makes sense. And to be fair, we don't know if it's the Grey Wardens chose this location to hunker down, or if the demons suggested this as a place to hunker down, which would make total sense to me because it says in the book the Fade is the veil is super thin here. So,
also, Adamant is a Grey Warden fortress.
It was long ago, ended up being abandoned. At this point, before Pharamond came along, it was not a Grey Warden fortress. In Inquisition, we make it a Grey Warden fortress again, I think. At least maybe more of a arm of the Inquisition working with Grey Wardens if you allow them to stay.
Mm-hmm. I just need Grey Wardens to stop building fortresses where the veil is thin.
Well, I don't think it's that they're building fortresses where the veil is thin. I think that things are happening to cause the veil to become thin where the Grey Wardens are.
Okay, we'll give it to that.
Okay, we gotta stop tangenting.
Okay.
So, okay, when they're in the Fade, I want to talk about all the Fade events in one go. So, it starts and they're in the Battle of Denerim during the Fifth Blight when the Archdemon attacks. Cole gets separated from them, and the rest of the group decides to split up. Adrian and Wynn go to hunt down the demon, which has basically recreated Valrio. When they get to the Fade Spire, every mage within it is a tranquil. The demon is there, and Wynn easily overpowers and banishes it. Like, so easily, Adrian doesn't even have to cast a spell. She's obviously flabbergasted that Wynn has that much strength, and essentially figures out that Wynn has been possessed by a spirit. On the other hand, Evangeline and Reese go to find Cole, and they find him in a crude hut on the outskirts of Orlais, where he's hiding in a cabinet with his little sister Bunny, who has died. They're hiding from their abusive father, who the demon has possessed. And eventually Evangeline and Reese kill the demon, and they help Cole remember that it's just a memory. But it's obviously much more traumatic to Cole than the archdemon seeing it again was for Wynn. So it's I think a little bit more real for Cole. Because he's buried these memories down for so long, and there's just a lot there. But anyway, right when Cole remembers like this is just a memory, like it's not real, is when they all leave the Fade because Wynn has banished the demon.
Yeah, I think with Cole, at least in this, I think it affects him because the spirit in him doesn't know how to deal with things like memory and emotions like that. And we see that all the time. Justice can't handle Anders' experience of mages, and that corrupts him, and just general things like that. And even like just so much in Solas's side quest where the wisdom spirit gets corrupted into the pride demon by the fear and the emotion of the mages that summon it. And so I think that's part of it. Again, more sad Cole hours. But it's interesting to me with Adrian, who, as the book goes on, I like less and less, which I think I'm supposed to. And just her just like being like, there's no way you'd have that strength. You have a demon. Like, it's such a bold jump for me because like, this is like a hero of the Fifth Blight. Like, this is probably one of the strongest mages in Thedas.
Yeah, fair. I also agree. Okay. We'll get into Adrian later. I have some thoughts. I don't want to get too far into it right now. So let's finish up talking about Pharamond, and then we can go to our mid-break. But in the material plane, Pharamond is back to his normal self. He's no longer tranquil, though he is horrified to learn that he was responsible for the deaths of the inhabitants of Adamant. And he does explain that he's been researching the Rite of Tranquility at the behest of the Chantry for many years to see if an alternative existed. He learned that it is indeed possible to reverse it, obviously, but that your mind has to be touched by a demon or a spirit. His was touched by a demon, hence how he became possessed, but it doesn't have to be a demon. It can be a non-combative spirit, which we also learn via Cassandra in Inquisition. Adrian pretty much immediately wants to spread this knowledge to everyone in Thedas, while Evangeline, again, upon her orders from Lambert, is much more wary. I don't think Evangeline is staunchly like, no, we have to squash this information. She's reserved. She's afraid of what this information could do because this is world-changing information. This is information that threatens the very fabric of Thedas. So it's normal and natural, I think, to be wary of what that information will do. So Adrian's response to Evangeline's wariness is to attack her. And this is when Reese intervenes, and he suggests that they leave the decision to the divine. Everybody else in the group is like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And so they end up leaving. They do find Cole along the way and convince him to return with them so as to end Reese's implication in the murders. However, Evangeline does promise to defend him, saying that the first duty of Templars is to protect the mages and that the Circle failed Cole once and she won't allow it again. She also, when they leave the fortress, basically heads off the other group of Templars that's there waiting for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the big confrontation scene, obviously, is the revelation that the Rite of Tranquility can be reversed, and Adrian's response and Evangeline's response, too. And I think I'm with you that, like, Evangeline is not like, no, we don't need to spread this information. It's more of like akin to, we need to be careful how we spread this information. Because, and I think Evangeline is not really afraid of what the mages will do. I think she's afraid of what the Templars will do.
Yes, I completely agree, because there's only one thing that the mages are going to do. The mages are going to break away from the circles, period. Mm-hmm. But the Templars, they could let them. They could just go to the divine. They could attack. I mean, there's all kinds of things that the Templars could do, because the Templars are the ones in the position of power.
Right. And you have, I think Evangeline and the most recent Evangeline are both very practical and smart people who understand the systems in which they live in work. And Evangeline knows that when you take away the Rite of Tranquility, you take away the fear that the Templars hold against the mages. Like, every mage has nightmares about either being possessed or being made tranquil. It's just a point of that, like, the Templars would then fear losing their control. And when oppressors or people who are in control are afraid of losing it, they react harshly. That ends up hurting everyone. Which, you know what? Like, is that not what happened?
I mean, look at the world around us, too. Like, is that not what's happening every single day?
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
But I think it is time to go to our mid-break now, so we can turn it over to you.
What is this? A new book? All this shit is weird. Oh, Verk, that is a terrible title. What are you even thinking?
That book you were reading this morning, Assyrian Spear. I don't think he had a spear in the legends.
He does in this one. Read the description.
Andraste knelt before no man but her maker. But she hadn't counted on the Archon Hessarian. Can Hessarian penetrate the tight-knit defenses of the warrior prophetess? Will she be prepared to face the full blast of his power? Wait a minute. Isabella, this is a vulgar thing.
You want to borrow it?
No!
You sure? It has pictures.
Not listening, I'm not listening.
Verk, does Hawk ever autograph books?
Why? Doesn't your copy of The Tale of the Champion have a big hole in it?
Yes, but it could also have Hawk's signature on it.
All right, welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons. Thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. If you want to join us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/DALorecast. If you don't want to support us on Patreon, that's totally fine. We know that's not for everyone. You can leave us ratings and reviews. We on Spotify and Apple. If you leave us a comment and 5 stars or a review on Apple with 5 stars, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. We have none to read today, so if you're still waiting, get on there, get a comment, comment us. Let me know what you think about Lord Seeker Lambert. Do you love him? Do you hate him? Do you want to kiss him? Like, I don't know who. Look, there are people who want to kiss Gillinon, so I'm not gonna, I don't know what the phrase is. Basically, kink shame is the word I'm looking for, but there was like a phrase of something like ick someone's like.
I'm not gonna yuck your yum.
Yeah, yuck your yum.
I was just gonna say, if Lambert is your yum, I'm definitely yucking it.
Okay, well, I won't. Shelby might, but I won't.
There's no might. I will.
Okay. So, anyway, you want to come talk to us about that, you can join the Discord, whatever. Cubs Podcasting and More Discord server. You can hang out with us. We are officially at the release of this episode 2 weeks from Veilguard. It's coming. I can't wait. It's going to be awesome. And with that, that's all I have for the middle of the show.
All right, let's get back into it.
The past years have been so busy. We have earned at least a few moments of rest. A calm night out sounds... Oh, bravo! Bravo! Was the woman in gold playing a king? Who was the man in feathers? Oh, it's all very simple. The first actor's mask is determined by... well, I will lend you the program guide. But tell me, did you enjoy the performance? That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Truly. That part with the glittery, and they actually set fire to... Yes, I truly enjoyed it. Then I call tonight a great success.
I've got some of it written down now.
Give it here. Her breasts strained against the leather jerkin like two wild stallions corralled against their will. She pounced, the smooth moves of a jungle cat, and locked her thighs around Donnick's waist. He...
What? Nothing. What is that? Shh.
Isabella just thought she'd celebrate your love affair with a written dedication.
It's friend fiction. I do it out of love.
I will never, ever be clean again.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right, so back into Asunder. So the gang is leaving Adamant Fortress, and on the way back, they kind of get close to the circle at Montsimard. And so Wynn sends Shale to that circle in order to send a message to the Divine and the White Spire with a sending stone. The Orlesian Civil War is really well underway with Gaspard by this point, and his soldiers are throughout the Orlesian heartlands. And so Evangeline, during their journey back, is basically reconsidering her allegiance to the Templars, and she even offers Rhys his phylactery, like, hey, go, like, save yourself, leave, take this with you. And he doesn't. But also Adrian is pushing Rhys to oppose the Templars even more, which is funny because Adrian is basically like, the Templars are evil, they're horrible, like, you should hate them, blah, 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 blah. And then you have this Templar who is here being the very example of what you want the Templars to be, and like not evil. And so I'm sure for Rhys, to put yourself in his shoes, it's like, well, she's saying one thing, but then the person in front of me is acting a different way. So it's, what Adrian is saying would fall on deaf ears, I feel. But anyway, Rhys also confronts Wynn about her being an abomination, and they are mad at each other, as they always are throughout this whole book till the very end. And they reach Val Royeaux to find that there is an entire army camped outside the city gates, which have been closed for the first time in many years. And Lord Seeker Lambert is the only one that will let them through. And so he comes down and lets them in.
Yeah, I think with you and Adrian and just this falling on deaf ears, I think it is so true, because this comparison gets made by Rhys later in the books. But Adrian is like a less terroristy Anders.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that comparison, that exact comparison gets made by Rhys later for a later revelation. And I just think that like I'm so reminded of just like Anders' conversations with Fenris is similar to this, of when he's like trying to get Fenris to, you know, see the plight of the mages, and Fenris is always coming back with, but yeah, like, but then I was enslaved and tortured. And I feel like that is like kind of a reverse thing. Adrian is trying to be like, the Templars are evil, and Rhys is just like, but here's this Templar who has been fighting with us and trying to protect us. Here's this Templar who is bringing back a spirit possessed mage that she wants to protect because she feels that the circle has failed in its duty to protect this boy. Like, it's so point of like, there are a few people who I think actually represent what the Templars are supposed to be, like from the get-go, which is Evangeline is one of them, and I think Sir Varys is another. I know people love Cullen and he gets there, but he does not start there.
Completely 112,000% agree with that. So back to the book a little bit. They do get summoned to meet with the Divine, where they basically all argue about the implications of Pharamond's research. Lambert is livid, on the brink of declaring the rite of annulment on every mage in the White Spire, which the Divine is like, you need to chill. Wynn also shares that not only did she use the Sending Stone to communicate with the Divine and the White Spire, she also used the Sending Stone to spread the information to every single circle in Thedas, which is huge. Lambert is like, he is basically on the brink of combusting. He's so angry. Justinia does agree to some kind of reformation of the circles, which they decide they're going to discuss at a conclave, which will be held in 3 weeks at the White Spire. After this meeting, Lambert basically fires Evangeline, believing that Cole is nothing more than a demon and that she's crazy. He also claims that he will find Cole guilty for the murders and not Reese if Evangeline denounces Pharamond's research. We learn more about Lambert's backstory in Tevinter. The conclave begins, and before they vote to separate, Lambert arrives with an army of Templars interrupting. He says that their actions are treason and that Pharamond has been murdered at the hands of Reese. The murder weapon was even found in Reese's chambers. Violence breaks out, resulting in dozens of deaths on both sides. Ultimately, the mages are overpowered, and Lambert imprisons them.
It's like this point of, you know how they always, the like age-old saying, they'd be like, oh, you'll be more reserved and conservative in your old age or whatever. Like, Wynn has done the opposite of that. Like, Origins Wynn would have never done this. Whereas Wynn is like, oh yeah, we'll do caution, and you know, she's going to tell the Divine, and then Lambert's like, no, blah, 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 I'm Lambert, and blah, blah, blah. And Wynn's just like, okay, well, I already did the nuclear option, so you can go fuck yourself.
That's exactly what happens. It's so funny that to me, Wynn goes from 0 to 100 so quickly, where like in Origins, you really have to like repeatedly get her revved up and upset about something. But in this, she's like, nope, I'm done. It's over. I've already fucked everything up. So good luck solving that problem, because I don't care.
Right. And it's just a point of, we don't get a lot of what Wynn and Shale have been up to since we see Wynn in Awakening.
We do get like one line about how she has basically been helping Shale figure out who Shale was before she became a golem. But that's it.
Yeah. And so like we don't get this journey. It seems so sudden for us because we don't get the journey of Reserved Origins Wynn to this Wynn. We just kind of get there. And I think it is kind of like, it goes back to, I want to talk about a little bit of psychology, but you know, we talk about these stages of development, and like Wynn is in this stage where she would be more looking at what she's leaving on the earth.
Her legacy.
And I think she wants to leave of Thedas better than it is. And I think that is a lot of her focus of helping Shale and like helping mages, because she's at the point where she's probably cautioned like patience and, you know, let's like work the system and do all of that. And she's gotten there and she's like, oh, this is getting nowhere. And I think she sees at this point of like, the leadership is what broken. The system is what is broken. Under Lambert, there will be no reform of the circles. Like, yes, Justinia wants to do this, but she's basically powerless to do so because at a moment's notice, Lambert could issue the rite of annulment.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
And so she does this nuclear option. And then there's all of this thing about Pharamond's murder and, you know, the firing of Evangeline and all of that. And it's just so funny that like the circles are going to vote to break away, and Lambert comes in and makes this situation so much worse. Like they could have broken if Lambert had not acted the way that he did, the circles could have broken away and conversations could have still been had. But Lambert has to go the nuclear option because he feels backed into corner because he wasn't able to control what is happening. And he thinks any mage left to their own devices will resort to blood magic. Lambert and Meredith are so similar, except Lambert is not insane.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Lambert is significantly more intelligent than Meredith is. I think he's a better villain too. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great story about how absolute power corrupts absolutely, you know? And when you've been handed absolute power and the ability to make every decision for a group of people your whole entire life, or at least most of it, how you don't want to give that up. And I think it's a cautionary tale, you know, like when we ourselves get into positions of power, we have to really take steps, I think, to not, you know, kind of lord it over other people like Seeker Lambert does.
Yeah. My other thoughts about this have to do with like the Mage Templar War. And I have a lot of thoughts about the Mage Templar War, but I know that's more of an overall book conversation. So let's continue with the plot and we can get into that later.
Okay. So, the mages are overpowered, but Wynn and Evangeline are able to escape to the sewers, where they do eventually see Cole, and he leads them into the bowels of the White Spire, like we've discussed earlier. Wynn at first wants to attack Cole because she thinks that he is Pharamond's murderer, but he's not. Adrian is, which is supposed to come as a little bit of a surprise to the reader, I think, but to me, I was like, oh yeah, it's not Reese, it's not Cole. It's fucking Adrian, because of course it is. But anyway, they eventually meet up with Shale as well as Liliana. And so when Shale and Evangeline go upstairs to destroy all of the phylacteries, while Liliana and Cole stay in the dungeons to free the rest of the mages. Cole and Reese eventually escape, but they're soon found by Lambert, who uses the Litany of Adralla from Origins, if you remember that deep cut, to prove that Cole is in fact a demon. As Lambert is about to kill Reese, Evangeline shows up to fight for him. Lambert kills Evangeline, but Wynn appears and sacrifices herself to save her. Unclear to me whether Wynn uses all of her magic to save Evangeline, or if the spirit of faith enters Evangeline willingly and Wynn has just died as a result. But afterwards, Evangeline says that she feels no different.
I think I line in the camp that Evangeline does not have the spirit of faith.
Really? See, I think that she does, because I think that it's a more powerful story for this mother who's been estranged from her son for decades, for 40 years, who's really never had a relationship with her son, to have conflict with him, to kind of patch things up, and then to sacrifice herself for his lover. I think that's a very touching story. And so to me, the other way around is just kind of like, okay, that's fine too, I guess.
Right. Well, I think Wynn is dead no matter what.
Yeah, 100%. This is not a question of is she dead or not. She is 100% for sure dead.
Right. I think what is more likely, because I don't think a spirit of faith can possess someone and remain a spirit of faith if that person isn't willing to accept them. And I don't know if Evangeline necessarily would have been willing to accept a spirit possessing her.
But if she's unconscious, is she really able to accept it?
Right, but I think a spirit of faith would know the difference.
I don't know. I think it's unclear to me.
It is.
I think a lot of people on the internet say, "Oh, the spirit of faith possessed Evangeline," and that's the end of it. But I think it's a little bit murkier than that, personally.
Yeah. I think it's possible that when released the spirit and took that magic and used it to revive Evangeline, which we know that per lore and maybe game mechanic that there is magic that can revive. Maybe not death, or I don't know if in Origins you technically die or you just fall unconscious.
I don't know.
Right. These are just all kinds of things I don't know. But I think that this comes down to, it is murky and gray and unclear But I think either way, it doesn't matter, and we won't know until we see Evangeline again.
Which will probably never happen.
Right.
But let's finish up this story. So a month passes, and the surviving mages have fled to Andoral's Reach, which is an ancient Tevinter fortress on the border of Orlais. Refugees continue to arrive slowly. Rhys has left the Libertarian fraternity to join his mother's Aquitarians. The conclave has been reconvened, and Rhys casts the deciding vote as the new leader of the Aquitarians to formally fight the Chantry for their independence. Also, Rhys and Evangeline have become more formal lovers in a relationship, and they lay Wyn's ashes to rest underneath an oak tree outside of the fortress. The story ends with Lord Seeker Lambert hosting a conclave of his own with 15 knight commanders who all agree with his proposals. An army is being raised to mount an attack on Andoral's Reach in 3 days' time, and Lambert has written a letter to the Divines stating that, due to the Divines' interference with his efforts and collusion with the escapee mages, Lambert declares the Navaran Accords null and void. Neither the Templar Order nor the Seekers of Truth will acknowledge the Chantry's authority, but will act to enforce the Maker's will as they see fit. Lambert has one of his men deliver the letter to the Grand Cathedral and retires to his room, only to be held at knife point by Cole, who threatens that he is no longer powerless to harm the Templars, killing Lambert as the story ends.
Which I think probably explains why Cole is in Champions of the Just. He's probably been following the Templars since then. But I also think at this point, it's so interesting to me that Rhys is the one who is like, it falls to Rhys to cast the final vote to basically secede from the Chantry.
Yeah, I think it's fitting.
I know the Seekers have a complicated relationship, and they are kind of like, they are servants of the Divine, but the Divine doesn't rule over them. And there's a complicated thing because the Seekers come out of the First Inquisition.
Yes.
Like that is what establishes them. And so, but it's so funny to me because like the Seekers, Lord Seeker Lambert declares that, the Seekers of Truth and Templars aren't going to recognize the Chantry's authority. And Cassandra is basically just like, well, fuck that. I'm going to go start the Inquisition and show you all to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, pretty much. So let's get into some character spotlight in our analysis real quick because we are running out of time. So character spotlight, we've been talking about all of them. They are Rhys, Evangeline, Cole, Wyn, Shale, Adrian, and Lambert. You could also maybe throw the Divine in there. But the first thing, and I think this is the main thing that we need to talk about in our analysis, is what is Cole? So I have some thoughts, and I'll put my thoughts out there and you can kind of tell me if you agree, disagree, whatever. But in Inquisition, that game asserts that Cole is a spirit of compassion. Many refer to him as a demon and many refer to him as a spirit. It seems to me that the reason why Cole is able to be seen and remembered in Inquisition in comparison to this novel is because Cole has chosen to be seen. He has finally become okay with people seeing him. And I think we see this at the end of the book. And this is like the last closing line of the book that I want to read. And it says this. The young man leaned close, his expression one of deadly intent. There was a Cole, he whispered. You forgot him in that cell, and I heard his cries when no one else would. I went to him and held his hand in the darkness until it was over. When the Templars found him, they erased everything to hide their shame, and I was helpless to act. Sorrow and perhaps even regret crossed the young man's face, but only for a moment. I'm not helpless any longer. The words sent a chill through Lambert's heart. What do you want from me? The young man smiled coldly. I want you to look into my eyes.
Yeah, it's a really chilling scene, which is like, it really paints Cole in like this new light of like, we're introduced to the Inquisition, and it's like, oh, here's this weird kid or guy, whatever, who says some funny things. He's a killer rogue or whatever, but we don't really think about him as like a murderer and an assassin until you do his side quest and he almost kills someone, and you can either let him or stop him or let Varric come and parent him, whatever. Or Solus, whatever.
Don't be a Solus hater.
Okay, I will not be a Solus hater because I'm going to hate on someone else in a little bit. Anders. Anyway, but it's so interesting to me of like, there was a Cole and you all forgot him is a really chilling line. And I think it ranks up there with like, I have seen the throne of the gods and it was empty, as like kind of like chilling cold lines of like, oh crap, like this is something big. And I think Cole is a spirit of compassion, and I think that it is a choice of kind of emerging between material and spirit, because that's really what like is like core around Dragon Age, is that the spirit and the material are not meant to mix together. But we have kind of two big examples of this. We have Anders and Justice, and we have Wynn and the Spirit of Faith. And so Wynn has a symbiotic kind of relationship with the Spirit of Faith. They benefit each other. Anders and Justice are the opposite. And Cole is trying to find this medium ground where the people aren't competing, because the Spirit of Compassion wants to help people. But like you said, the boy Cole doesn't know what compassion is.
Yeah.
And that's a big conflict. And I think it's one of the reasons why I try to leave Cole human in Inquisition. Is that if I read this book, I would have been more on the fence. But after reading this book, I'm like, no, this needs to be more human, because the spirit world will never be at peace with the material world until they can truly understand what it's like to have all of the emotions of being a humanoid, a human elf, Qunari, a sentient being in Thedas.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also just wonder, though, like, even then, will that work? You know, I'm not sure that it will. But I want to move on a little bit, because I think we could talk about Cole forever. And if you want to hear more about our conversations about Cole, go listen to our character deep dive on him. But I think there's a big implication of this book, which is the effects of all of the things that happen are huge. And we've already mentioned this a little bit, but you know, the reversal of the Rite of Tranquility, the beginning of the Mage Templar War, the role of the Divine, the role of the Seekers, the role of the Templars, the circles, like all of these things are huge, huge conversations that, like, any one of these things is something that they would talk about for decades before really implementing any change. So the fact that it all happens right at once is, I mean, it's a phenomenal shift.
Yes, lots of implications in this book. And I want to talk about, because Anders is brought up a lot in this book, or his event.
Yeah.
He's mentioned maybe by name once, but the event of Kirkwall is brought up a lot. But I want to stop here, because a lot of people point to Kirkwall as the point of no return. For the Mage Templar War. And I think it's definitely a catalyst, but I don't actually think it is the point of no return. And I don't even think the Ravani Circle is a point of no return. The actual point of no return for this war is when Lambert marches in to the Circle meeting and disrupts it. That is what I think is the point of no return.
I don't agree. I think the point of no return is when Wynn sends the message to all of the circles.
You think everything that happens from that moment to the end of Inquisition is unavoidable from that moment?
I think that the war is unavoidable from that moment, because I think that the Templars are never, ever going to, once they hear that information, every Templar in power, every Knight Commander is going to react the same way that Seeker Lambert does.
I guess that's a fair point. And I think, yeah, because that's the point of like, oh, we can't control these mages. Lambert and the Divine issuing caution and saying, like, we'll figure this out. And Wynn saying, oh, I've taken this out of your hands. In a lot of ways, So I'm going to rephrase what I said. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of comparison to Anders. Obviously, Adrian gets compared to Anders by Rhys and saying like he wanted to do this as a point of no return, which is why Adrian kills Faramond, because she wants to ignite this war. But Wynn and Anders have similar motives with what they do. Because one of Anders' things that he says is the decision or the choice is no longer in your control to Orsino and Meredith. That is one of the things that he says when he blows up the Chantry. Wynn is saying the same thing to Justinia and Lambert, and basically saying this isn't in your control anymore because I took matters into my own hand because I'm a free-thinking individual and not just your slave or puppet. But I think Anders gets a lot of hate, believe it or not, sometimes from me for being responsible for the Mage Templar War. And I don't think that's the case. I think he is one of many things that leads to it. But the point of no return is this book.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a lot of different things that happen in Thedas to make the war unavoidable, and Anders is just one of many.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to talk about the characterization real quick, because there's a lot of characters in this book. There's a lot of new characters. There's a lot of returning characters. And for me, they kind of get repetitive. Rhys is, this sassy man, similar to Alistair, similar to Dorian. Evangeline is a strong, straight, supposedly, woman, similar to Cassandra, similar to Aveline. And then we have angry, unreasonable, dark-haired man, Lambert, who's similar to Loghain, I would argue. And I just feel like at some point in time, like, these characters kind of all run together. This book's characters don't necessarily feel as unique to me as some of the other characters have. But I will say, and I said this to you the other day, David Gaider can write as many buff, strong, hot, straight women as he wants. I will fall for that shit every single time. Every single time I will fall for it. But I still remain like, there's no way these women are straight. I'm sorry. It's just not reality to me.
As we kind of joke all the time, like David Gaider should, not that he should not write women, but he should get some, like, there are more ways to write women. And like, why is he obsessed with shoulders? Like, I don't understand why he's obsessed with shoulders.
Was there a line about shoulders?
I can't remember exactly, but it was something about like in Evangeline's description as a broad woman or something like that.
I did realize something else that kind of irked me about this book is that like every single woman is described as pretty or beautiful, except for Wynn. And that kind of just annoys me. Like, women are so much more than that. Like, we can describe them in more descriptive ways, I feel. And so that kind of frustrated me. Like, a woman's worth is not in her beauty. And same for men. Like, a man's worth is not in, how nice looking he is or how many muscles he has.
Also, but like, how subjective of a term. And like, when we think about like words that I've seen in novels just across the board, not just David Gaider, but across the board, like, men are described as weathered, earthy, rugged, other kinds of burly is another one, that just other things that paint more of a picture, but we don't get a picture other than like, oh, they're pretty, which then like invokes some kind of like bullshit normalized version of beauty that we have in our head.
Yeah, I do think that it almost, to me, implies a fragility. Like burly and weathered, like those things imply strength, in my opinion. So it's just interesting the choices writers make that reflect their implicit biases. But I don't want to spend forever on this. But I do want to talk about Adrian for a little bit, because I think she's supposed to be a sympathetic character. And I found her so incredibly unlikable from the beginning, I could not stand her. The only fine moment she has is when her and Wynn are drinking dwarven ale, and she's like, oh, there's no way this old woman will be able to outdrink me. Dwarven ale? Are you kidding me? No way. And then Wynn obviously drinks her under the table. Like, that's funny. But other than that moment, like, every single choice she made, I found to be annoying.
Right. And like, we're talking about tropes like Genevieve, Catriel, Adrian, all women who end up making some type of betrayal. Genevieve, medium sympathetic, I guess. Like, you can see like where she's like struggled in that, but again, you're just like, you could have made better choices. Catriel is 100% someone who is sympathetic. Yes. I feel bad for Catriel
100%.
Every time. She starts out as this bard who's trying to do her duty, and then she falls for Merrick. That's not her fault. You know, is truthful about her betrayals or whatnot, and Merrick kills her.
Yeah.
It's a tragic story. You feel sympathetic for Catriel because Catriel's intentions were pure, but she did betray. Whereas like Genevieve and Adrian are like, okay.
Like where's your
redeeming quality?
Yeah, where's your redeeming quality? Yeah, for Genevieve, that bitch, it was over for me when she kicked the dog. I'm sorry. No ma'am.
Right. And it's just like, and part of it is like, it's hard to make a sympathetic character who's going to be antagonistic with an established character that we already like.
Wynn.
Yeah,
fair.
And so that's hard. And also like the drinking scene, of course Wynn can outdrink her. She spent a year traversing the country with Ogren.
I know. And she even mentions Ogren, like there's a line where I don't even remember how it goes, but it basically is like, well, I had a friend who was drunk all the time and I bet he could kill more darkspawn than you, basically, which is just funny to me.
Yeah, he's a Grey Warden now.
But let's talk about some lore discrepancies here in our closing. And I have a few, and I just want to see if you caught any of these other than the year aspect, which we've already mentioned. So first, Justinia V is described at least twice, I think 3 times, as a quote younger woman than the previous divine, even up to the aftermath of the Kirkwall explosion. And then she immediately appears in Inquisition as this ancient, like, wrinkled woman.
I just want to say, like, Pope Francis is one of the youngest popes. And
was.
What do you mean was? He's still alive.
I mean, was when he like acceded to the Pope.
Right. But he was still like 60.
Yeah, I mean, fair. But like Justinia in Inquisition, like she looks wizened. Like she looks like a crone.
I sometimes think that David Gaider just writes what he wants and then lets BioWare and Dragon Age just figure out the rest later.
I don't know. Okay, let me continue with my lore discrepancies. So in the Western approach, Rhys is lacerated by a darkspawn talon. Wouldn't that be enough to give him the taint? It's never remarked upon after the fight. But like he's cut open in his shoulder.
I am so confused by, and I think this just has to do with the fact that we're dealing with a 15-year-old game whose lore is inconsistent and changes over the years. But in Origins, we're introduced to the Darkspawn as like this hive mind zombie kind of thing. Like if you're bitten by them or ingest their blood, like you're going to turn into a ghoul. And then that Dragon Age 2 doesn't really deal with the Darkspawn at all. A little bit, like. And like Bethany gets the taint just from being in the Deep Roads.
I thought they got into a fight with Darkspawn and that's how she got it.
Maybe. And then by the time we get to Inquisition, like you fight Darkspawn all the time.
Not really.
But then you go into the Deep Roads and there's never any concern or mention about the taint. So I think it's just something that maybe they haven't addressed because they don't want to deal with it. And
well, I want the answer.
Okay, well, ask David Gaider on Twitter.
Okay. Another discrepancy is that Navarin is misspelled as Navarin, which I just think is funny. As like an editor is my job, so of course I'm going to notice that. And then the last thing, which I think is actually pretty significant, the Western approach is multiple times described as mottled and a bruised environment with purple sand, which we clearly do not see that in Inquisition.
I mean, I would say it's bruised. But yeah, I wonder if like the purple sand was just too much for the like for the engine to handle, and they had to retcon that, and like it just looked weird because a lot of times like missing textures, like if textures are missing, they'll appear like kind of like clayey and sometimes purple. And so I bet if a purple sand, it made it difficult to detect missing textures, so they kept that out so they could see it.
Yeah, that's probably fair, but still. All right. Are we ready to give our ratings for this one?
Yes, I am. So plot, I'm going to give it a 3.5. It was kind of predictable, but again, like it is a really good setup to Inquisition. And like if you want to know what's going on before this book and the next one we're going to read, Masked Empire, are probably the best ones like that set up. Masked Empire has a little bit more implications for DAV than this one does. This one has no implications for DAV really. But yeah, I would give it a 3.5. Characters, I think a 2.5. Probably similar. They're likable. A lot of them are repeats, but I do think they're kind of forgettable. 4 for prose, dialogue 4, world building, lore accuracy 3. There are inconsistencies that happen that need to be addressed. The timeline one is a big one for me.
Yeah.
Like that needs to be figured out. When does Dragon Age either say Dragon Age 2 ends in 939 or I think that's the easier thing.
I agree. I do agree. So for me, I think the plot is a 3. I remember when I read this the first time, well, picking this up for the second time and thinking back to when I read it the first time, it felt to me like it moved a lot slower and that the journey to Adamant and back took up more of the book than it actually did. So for me, it's kind of, the plot is kind of all over the place. So I did give it a 3. For characters, I gave it a 2.5. And I think it would have been much higher if it hadn't fallen into so many tropes. I feel like a lot of his female characters especially fall into tropes. And it's like you've said, it's very hard to write returning characters and new characters and make them equally likable, make them equally what we care about. And so I think that's hard, and I'm not sure it worked. And so 2.5 is what I'd say for characters. For prose, I would say 4. The writing is good. His writing technically is always good. I like David Gaider's prose. Technically, again, it's good. It's some of the more other things, whereas he's like always using tropes and those kinds of things. This one, though, I have to give him props for because it didn't feel too video gamey. The Stolen Throne feels very much like a video game novel. This one does not. This one I think reads just as a fantasy novel. So 4 for prose. And dialogue also for 4. This one didn't really stand out to me in the way that some of the other ones have, but I still think perfectly good. And then for me, world building and lore accuracy, I did give a 3, which is a little bit higher than I initially thought, because even though there are some lore discrepancies, I did feel like there is just so much in this novel, and to have this few lore discrepancies with this much important content, I do feel like is pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that rounds out to a 3.3 for me.
Right. And I think one of the things about this book in particular is it is one of the few books that I feel like you need to have played the games to understand this book. Whereas like the other ones have not been that. You do not need to play any game to read Last Flight. You don't need to play any game to even read Stolen Throne or The Calling. Like these books can stand alone. And I even think Tevinter Nights, as like heavy in the lore it is, can be read without having to have played the game. But this book is not an entry point into this series. Like you cannot just pick up Asunder and figure out what's going on and jump in. Nothing is explained. Nothing is really like we know because we're avid Dragon Age fans.
Right. Like I think you could read this book before playing Dragon Age Inquisition easily, but like you've got to have at least played Origins to familiarize yourself with the world. And there's going to be so many references you just won't get if you don't.
Yeah. But all in all, I think it's a good book. The Stolen Throne still ranks among my favorite of David Gaider's books. I probably would rank this one higher than The Calling, though.
Oh, yeah. The Calling is not good in my reread. I think The Stolen Throne has better characters, but I think this book has better plot.
Yeah. All right. Well, you have anything else to add?
That's all I've got.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DALorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Hello, Vault Dwellers. Join me, Jaxus, Sassy Lady Romer, Eric, and the Creator Maverick as we take topics from the Fallout universe and discuss them with other diverse individuals. We can be found wherever you listen to your podcast. You can follow us on YouTube. You can also find us on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it using @FalloutRTD. You can send us an email using falloutrtd@gmail.com. Join us. The conversation has already started.